Phoenix Sky Harbor Airport was loud that evening, the way airports always are. Announcements echoing off the high ceilings, wheels of luggage rattling across polished floors, 100 conversations blending into one restless hum. Nobody in that terminal noticed. The woman standing at counter 14, until her voice cracked. Her name was Grace Whitfield. She was 34 years old, a trauma nurse who had spent the last 11 hours on her feet at Banner Medical Center, still wearing her scrubs because there hadn't been time to change. Her badge was clipped crooked to her chest. Her eyes were red, not from crying yet, but from holding it in for 3 hours straight since the phone call. The call had come at 2 in the afternoon, right in the middle of a shift change. Her brother's voice, shaking, telling her that their mother had collapsed at the assisted living home in Portland. That the doctors were saying words like cardiac event and limited time and you should come now, Grace, not tomorrow, now. She had asked her supervisor to cover the rest of her shift, driven home in a daze, packed a bag without folding anything properly, and driven straight to the airport without eating. Now she stood at the counter, credit card in her trembling hand, watching the airline agent shake her head. "I'm sorry, ma'am. This card was declined. Do you have another form of payment?" Grace swallowed hard. Please try it again. There has to be a mistake." The agent tried again, declined again. Grace's hands went to her purse, digging through it, pulling out a second card, a third, watching each one fail on the small screen. She hadn't checked her balance in days. Between her mother's care costs and her own rent and the medications she'd been quietly helping pay for, she knew, somewhere in the back of her mind, that this might happen. She just hadn't let herself believe it would happen tonight. Of all nights. "I don't understand," she whispered, more to herself than to the agent. "I don't understand. I need to get on this flight. My mother is dying. I need to see her." Her voice broke on the last word. The line of passengers behind her, tired travelers checking their watches, mothers with children, businessmen scrolling on their phones, all of them fell into an uncomfortable, rippling silence. A few looked away, the way people do when grief becomes visible and they don't know what to do with their own hands. The airline agent, a young woman named Priya, looked genuinely pained. "Ma'am, I truly am sorry. The flight is 412 and none of the cards are going through. Is there anyone you can call?" Grace had already called her brother. He had nothing left either. He'd spent his savings on the assisted living deposit 2 months ago. She had no one else. Her father had passed 6 years earlier. Her friends were good people, but it was 9 at night, and asking someone to wire $400 in 20 minutes felt like asking for the moon. "I have no money left," Grace said. And this time the words came out broken, raw, loud enough that the whole line heard it. "My mother is dying. Please, I just need to get to Portland." She pressed her palms against her eyes, scrubs still smelling faintly of the hospital. And for a moment she simply stood there, shaking, trying to hold herself together in the middle of a crowded terminal. That was when a man stepped out of the line behind her. He was tall, maybe 40, wearing a plain gray jacket and carrying nothing but a worn leather backpack. His name was Daniel Ashworth, though nobody in that terminal knew that yet. He had been 3 people back in line, close enough to hear everything. And something about the way Grace said, "My mother is dying," had stopped him cold. It reminded him of a night 8 years earlier, standing in a different airport, saying almost the exact same words about his own father, and not making it in time. He walked up to the counter, set his backpack down, and pulled out his wallet. "Put the ticket on my card," he said quietly to Priya. Grace turned, startled, tears still wet on her face. "What? No, I can't ask you to do that. You don't even know me." Daniel looked at her, and there was nothing performative in his expression. Nothing that asked to be thanked. "You're not asking. I'm offering. Nobody should have to choose between a plane ticket and their mother's last hours." "I can't pay you back tonight," Grace said, her voice unsteady. "I don't even know when I could." "I didn't ask you to pay me back," Daniel said. "I asked the airline to charge my card." Priya, who had been quietly watching this unfold, felt her own throat tighten as she processed the payment. The people in line behind them, who moments earlier had been sighing at the delay, were now completely silent, several of them wiping at their eyes, a few filming without meaning to intrude, simply unable to look away from something so unexpectedly human happening in a place built entirely for transit and hurry. "Why would you do this?" Grace asked, still stunned, clutching the boarding pass Priya had just printed. Daniel was quiet for a moment. 8 years ago, I stood exactly where you're standing. My father had a stroke back home in Ohio, and I was in Denver for work, and I didn't have the money for a last-minute flight either. I waited too long trying to figure it out. By the time I got there, he was already gone. His jaw tightened slightly. I've thought about that night almost every day since. If someone had done for me what I just did for you, I might have gotten to say goodbye. I'm not going to watch someone else miss that chance if I can help it. Grace's hand went to her mouth. The gate behind them had already started calling final, boarding for a different flight. And somewhere a stroller wheel squeaked past, and life kept moving the way it always does. But for those 30 seconds, it felt like the entire terminal had gone still around the two of them. "I don't know how to thank you," she said. "You don't have to," Daniel said. "Just go be with your mother." "That's the only thank you I need." Grace hugged him then, without thinking. The kind of hug that comes from somewhere deeper than gratitude, somewhere close to relief and grief and disbelief all tangled together. Daniel, a little surprised, hugged her back gently, and when she pulled away, she was crying harder than before, though this time it wasn't only from fear. She ran for the gate. Priya called after her that they'd hold the door if she hurried, and Grace didn't look back, though she would think about that man for the rest of her life. Daniel picked his backpack back up, checked in for his own flight, a red-eye to Chicago for a work conference he barely cared about anymore, and quietly returned to the back of the line as if nothing unusual had happened at all. A few strangers thanked him. One older man shook his hand without a word, and he simply nodded, uncomfortable with the attention, and found a seat near his gate to wait. Grace made her flight by 4 minutes. She landed in Portland just after midnight, took a cab straight from the airport without stopping to check her phone, and arrived at the hospital breathless, scrubs still on, hair still a mess from running. Her brother Mark was waiting in the hallway outside their mother's room, eyes hollow from exhaustion. "She's stable," he said before Grace could ask. "The doctor said it's not tonight. But she's been asking for you." Grace walked into the room where her mother, Eleanor Whitfield, lay propped up against white pillows, tubes in her arm, monitors beeping steadily beside her. Eleanor's eyes fluttered open at the sound of the door, and when she saw her daughter standing there, something in her face softened in a way that made Grace's chest ache. "You came," Eleanor whispered. "Of course I came." "Mom?" Grace sat on the edge of the bed and took her mother's hand, the same hand that had held hers through every fever, every scraped knee, every heartbreak of her childhood. "I almost didn't make it. I almost didn't make it. I didn't have the money for the ticket. A stranger paid for it. A man I've never met in my life just paid for it and told me to go." Eleanor's eyes filled with tears, though her smile stayed. "There are still good people in this world, Grace. I always told you that." "I know, Mom, I know." They talked for hours that night, about nothing and everything, the way people do when they understand time is no longer something to take for granted. Eleanor's condition stabilized over the following days. It wasn't a miracle recovery. The doctors were honest that her heart was weaker now, that this wouldn't be the last scare. But it also wasn't the ending Grace had feared on that terminal floor in Phoenix. She had gotten her time. She had gotten to say the things that needed saying, to hold her mother's hand without the terror of it being the last time, at least not yet. Grace stayed in Portland for 2 weeks, splitting nursing shifts with her brother, sleeping in the chair beside her mother's hospital. Bed more nights than she slept in an actual bed. And every single one of those nights, before she closed her eyes, she thought about Daniel Ashworth, the stranger in the gray jacket who had handed a boarding pass to a crying nurse and asked for nothing in return. She tried to find him. She asked Priya's airline for any record of the transaction, but privacy policies kept his information locked away. She posted online, hoping the story might reach him. And it did travel. Thousands of shares, comments from strangers saying it restored their faith in people. A version of the story even reaching a local Phoenix news segment. But Daniel never came forward. He wasn't the kind of man who wanted to be found. He had done what he did because 8 years earlier, nobody had done it for him. And that reason was enough. It didn't need an audience, and it didn't need a headline. Grace never learned his last name until nearly a year later, purely by accident, a chance conversation with Priya, who happened to remember the name on the card from that night after. Grace flew through Phoenix again on her way to visit her mother, now stable enough to have moved into a smaller, assisted care facility closer to Grace's home in Tucson. Priya mentioned the name almost in passing. Daniel Ashworth. Grace wrote it down like it was something sacred. She never did track him down for a dramatic reunion. No tearful airport reunion scene. No viral follow-up video. Real life doesn't often work that way. But she did write him a letter, care of the airline, in case it was ever passed along. In it, she told him that her mother was alive, that she had gotten to hear her mother's voice for another year of birthdays, and Sunday phone calls and small, ordinary moments that had once felt uncertain. She told him that his $400 had bought her something no amount of money could measure, more time, more goodbyes, more chances to say, I love you out loud instead of carrying the regret of never having the chance at all. She ended the letter simply, I don't know if you'll ever read this, but because of you, I got to hold my mother's hand one more year. I hope somewhere, somehow, life is just as kind to you as you were to me that night. Whether Daniel ever received that letter, Grace would never know for certain. But somewhere in Ohio, on a quiet evening 2 months later, a man sat at his kitchen table holding an envelope with unfamiliar handwriting, reading words that brought tears to eyes that hadn't cried. Since the night he lost his own father, he folded the letter carefully, placed it in an old wooden box where he kept the few things that mattered most to him, and for the first time in 8 years, he felt like some of the guilt he had carried since that missed goodbye had finally, quietly, begun to lift. Because sometimes healing doesn't come from getting back what we lost. Sometimes it comes from making sure someone else doesn't have to lose it too. And in an airport terminal in Phoenix, on an ordinary Tuesday night that felt like any other, a stranger's small act of kindness had quietly, permanently changed the course of two lives that never would have crossed paths otherwise. Proof that even in a world that so often feels rushed and indifferent, there are still people willing to stop, to notice, to give without expecting anything back at all.